From the Four Rivers Cultural Center in Ontario, Oregon, we bring you the third annual Tradition Keepers Festival, highlighting cultural artists in Oregon's Treasure Valley and beyond. In this episode, you'll meet Oinkari Basque dancers Wray and Jaclyn Lasuen.
The Basque people are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, existing culture in Europe. Today, their footprint is very, very small, about the size of Rhode Island in Spain, and even smaller in France. We're on that border between Spain and France in the Pyrenees Mountains, and the northern border is the Bay of Biscay. So right on the edge of the Iberian Peninsula, that's where you'll find Basque people today. Historically, their area has been a little bit larger, going down to maybe central Iberia and up to Bordeaux in France, but not much larger than that. Their language is unique. It's a language isolate. Our language, I should say, is unique. It's a language isolate. Only known relatives are so far non-existent. It's the only language in Europe that is an isolate, and it predates Latin by most generally accepted language dating methodologies. Now we're here in the U.S., mostly in southern Idaho, northern Nevada, Eastern Oregon, Northern California. Most of our families came primarily for sheep herding. A very, very common, chain migration story. Around the turn of the 20th century, there was lots of sheep in this part of the world. Sheep outpopulated people by a long ways, and they needed people to watch them up in the mountains when they were grazing. You didn't need to know English to sit in a tent or a cart up in the mountains for 9 months and watch a couple hundred sheep. And the Basque Country was a relatively poor area at that point. Very Catholic, they had lots of kids. The oldest son typically got the farm. The next couple went to the clergy. And after that, there was not a lot left for people to do. So a lot of them came to the U.S. to herd sheep. They knew that there was work over here. Most of them had the intention of going back to the Basque Country. And a lot of them did. My family came twice. My great-great-grandfather came in the late 1890s for a couple of years, herded sheep, earned enough money to go back and start a family, bought his own farm, had a family, and then my great-grandfather came in 1920 and stayed. But he also had the intention of going back. So it's a very common story to have a couple different generations come before eventually sticking here. And it all was based on a sheep industry and that agricultural life that they knew in the Basque Country and translated fairly well here. And they didn't have to know English. They didn't have to be able to work in big businesses or have high education levels. And they were able to scratch a living out of sagebrush and sheep.
How we connect Basque dancing to sheep herding here in Boise. This is the best story that I've heard about how they connect. In Boise, there were a lot of boarding houses that were Basque run. So some people would come here and gain enough money to buy their own boarding house. And then they had a strong pull for Basque women to come work in the boarding house, changing sheets and doing the cooking and doing the cleaning, etc. So the men were in the hills and they were herding sheep for 9 months, which was a terribly hard life. And then they would come down for 3 months and use all that money sort of in town. And so when they got to town and there's all these Basque women that suddenly they speak the same language, not only is this another human being that I can talk to instead of my sheep and my dog, but it's also a woman. Then they got to flirting a little bit. So the number one thing to do is to dance. And so they started throwing what we now refer to as the sheep herders ball. So the sheep herders ball in Boise evolved from a big boarding house dance. Just somebody has an accordion and somebody has a pandero, which is a tambourine. And then you can do a bunch of dances from the old country. So we started that sheep herders ball in Boise way back when, and it still exists today. And something that I think is really neat is that initially when they started inviting the public, not only sheep herders and the other people who lived in the boarding house, when they started inviting the public, they would charge a cost at the door, and all of that money would go to a family in need. And that's something that we still do today. So you can come, well, we'll see COVID, right? But you could come, in theory, to the 2020 Sheep Herders Ball, and it would be the same deal. Like the same thing would be happening now that was happening all those years ago.
So I started when I was 9, and it's a pretty common story here in Boise. We have a youth group called Boise Kogasteak, which means the young people of Boise, where you can start learning traditional dance when you're 4 years old. So I was a little bit of a late bloomer starting at 9, but starting when you're 4 years old, there's, I think, over 100 kids, even today, in that group learning traditional Basque dance, and you work your way up from when you're 4 until you're 14, so those 10 years in the youth groups learning a couple dances. Really, it's more of, preservation, keeping the basics alive, keeping people interested in the culture that their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents come from. But it's not much more than that. It's just kind of a taste for everything. When you're 14, you're eligible to join Oinkari, and it's really a big change. Oinkari is a professional group. We don't get paid as dancers, but the group considers ourselves of professional quality. We sell our performances for fundraising, and so people are paying us to dance, and we expect to have that quality. We also have a much larger repertoire, upwards of 50 dances at any one time, both extremely traditional, dating back thousands of years. I wasn't sure if I was going to take it when I was 14, being, a 14-year-old boy playing football, doing all of those things. Dancing was not really at the top of my priority list, but I decided to give it a shot for 1 year, and I've loved it ever since. This is now my 14th year with Oinkari. It's as healthy as it's ever been. We have 60 plus members continuing this cultural entity that's really unique in the Basque diaspora. There's other dance groups, and a lot of them have very similar missions to us, but here in the U.S. and here in Boise, we really pride ourselves on how historically accurate we are and how the tradition has continued unstopped since 1960, and we really hang our hat on that. Through dances, we will interweave the stories of who Basque people are, what our language is, what we're doing here, why we're still preserving this culture, oftentimes over 100 years after our families arrived on American soil. And all of that is done in little spurts along the way, with the main focus being the art and being the unique traditional dances to that part of Europe, and that we've continued to maintain here in the U.S., along with the traditional music. We're very lucky to have live musicians and enough live musicians here in Boise that we're never wanting for live music and live performance of the traditional music on the traditional instruments to accompany the dance and enhance the experience for both our dancers and the public that is watching. So externally, our goal is really just to raise awareness of who our culture is, who our people are.
As far as internal education for Oinkari, a lot of what we do is teaching our own dancers. When you join at 14, you may have had some training. Maybe you grew up in Boise, so you had some time to dance with that younger group of dancers, Boise Kogasteak, or maybe you're joining as a freshman at the college in Boise, so maybe you're coming from a place that has no dancers. So you might join as what we fondly refer to as new kids. You may join as a new kid at age 18 or sometimes even older than 18. So our focus is to get those people dancing and get them to know just a little bit about what our roots are about. So I think that we've done a very good job, especially lately, of getting people to know not only this dance is about this, but it's from this spot in the Basque Country, and this is maybe some of your families that could have come from that place, and things like that, which Alex really helps out with. But dancing is our big focus for ourselves, but also a lot of Oinkari also spend a lot of time teaching younger kids as well. So it's almost like a feeder program, really, when it comes to the end of the day. The Boise Kogasteak dancers are aged 4 to 14. They can end up being 14 before they join Oinkari. And so Oinkari do try to get a foot in the door down there so that those kids can see, like, wow, that person is a dancer with Oinkari. Maybe I want to be in Oinkari one day. So we try to spend volunteer hours dancing with those kids and teaching them some basics. We spend 4 hours every Sunday in a regular year here at the center dancing with each other and making sure that we have that foundation of Basque history, but also dance history, sort of. And then also, every once in a while, we get the chance to go somewhere else, usually in the United States, to teach a workshop or something like that. And that is if another group were to ask us to come, then we would be super stoked to go do something like that. Our connection to the Basque Country, Oinkari's connection to the Basque Country, is we're proud, as Alex has said, that we try to keep in touch as much as possible with groups who are dancing in the Basque Country, so that we make sure that our dance steps, like down to the step, is exactly as it was in the Basque Country, however many years ago that dance was created. So being in contact is a really big deal, and I think it's a lot easier nowadays because of the internet.
For me, the biggest piece of carrying on this tradition, the importance of carrying on this tradition during a global crisis like we're in today, is hope. And it's giving you something to look forward to, and to realize that these things all come to an end. In a culture as old as the Basque culture and the Basque community, they've experienced a lot of difficulties, right? Going as far back to the Punic Wars, when Hannibal's army was coming through the Iberian Peninsula and over the Pyrenees to attack Rome in the north, they went through the Basque Country. And there's accounts in Hannibal's army's poetry and in their journals of these crazy sounds and these crazy instruments being heard, and then being attacked by these savage people. Hello, we're still here in northern Iberia, that are still used. Those instruments are still used today. That language is still used today. That dancing is probably very similar, if not the same, to what we're still doing today. Fast forward through the Roman Empire and the occupation of the Roman Empire, and then the Spanish composition of the Basque Country. The Basques haven't had their own sovereign country for over 500 years, and yet we're still here as a new culture. The oppression of the Franco regime from 1930s through the 1970s, the Black Plague, the Spanish flu of 1918, everything has happened, and yet we're still here. And so there's something to be said about that continuity and having something to grab onto, to know that this too will pass, and that we'll still be here to get back to what we love, which is to dance and to make art and to make friendships and relationships around it.
I think the biggest thing that we have going for us too is we want to get together. All we want is to be together. So the second that we can safely, that's going to happen for us. And probably, if I know anything about Basque people, the first thing we're going to do is eat and dance together. So like Alex is saying, there's hope. There's hope for us, because all we really want to do at the end of the day is spend time with each other.